Hi, everyone. Mary Yijong, thanks so much for allowing us to participate in this wonderful symposium that you've put together on migration. We're so sorry that we couldn't be here with you today in person due to a scheduling conflict, but very happy that we're able to share our thoughts and some of our early results from our research. So I'm Christina Gibson, and I have Ada Hajro here with me as well. And I will start by turning it over to Ada so she can kick us off.
Thank you very much, Christina. What I will do now, I will, provide some contextual information, and Christina will go into more detail. But before I start, I would just like to emphasize that this is not a theoretical paper. The main aim behind this paper is to come up with solutions and best practice examples that corporate leaders can use when it comes to hiring, recruiting, and integrating migrant workers. So, going now to the context, I will not say much, but you have all seen it, and we see it: an aging workforce, the COVID-19 pandemic, great resignation, and shifting demographics have altered the labor market across the world. In the past, we used to talk about the global war for talent, but today, actually, we are using the term global race for labor. It's not only that we don't have enough skilled employees, but we also don't have enough lower skilled employees. So migration, very often portrayed in the media as a problem. Now in this context, can it be portrayed as a potential solution? Yes, up to a certain degree, because 97% of people on our planet stay in the countries where they were born, despite the fact that they could leave. And so in the last 60 years, the total number of international migrants has fluctuated only between 3.1% to 3.6% of the total global population. So migrants are a very valuable resource, and who will succeed in the global race for labor. We argue in this piece that only companies with internal capabilities for effectively attracting and managing migrant workforces will gain an upper hand in the global race for labor. So on the next slide, I will now briefly provide the context on high-skilled migrants and low-skilled migrants. So high-skilled migrants, around 70% of the skilled migrants to the OECD reside in 4 countries: United States, UK, Canada, Australia, or English-speaking. About a third of the total migrants worldwide reside in the United States. So most of them go to the cities, to the cosmopolitan cities, and it's also in the cities where the headquarters of many multinationals are based, which brings a lot of potential, but also challenges for corporations, and Christina will elaborate upon this in more detail. So nearly 70% of migrant workers reside in high-income countries, around 30% in middle-income countries, 3.6% in low-income countries. But, and I think this is important to note, from 2013 to 2019, high-income countries experienced a drop in migrant workers, whereas upper middle-income countries experienced an increase of 7.8%. We call this replacement migration. So high-income countries are employing migrants from emerging economies, and now these emerging economies don't have enough workers, so they're bringing them from low-income countries. 80% of global recruitments of low-skilled legal migrant workers are attributed to intermediaries. But to keep in mind, the business model of these intermediaries is typically based on requesting payment for job offers. So migrant pay in advance for getting a job abroad. So, and behind this is a whole global migration business. I will not go into much detail here. What you can see here are the different type of globally mobile employees that multinational companies employ. On the left-hand side are the high-skilled, and we have studied some of these categories in depth. And on the right-hand side are the low-skilled migrant workers. Just using one example, I will illustrate the extreme differences. An expatriate female migrant worker, when she goes abroad, she has challenges, of course. Will they find, or will her partner find employment? How will kids adjust to the school system? But a low-skilled migrant worker, female, that's going to work in a supply chain of a big multinational has very different challenges. She has to do a pre-pregnancy test before she departs. If she gets pregnant, then she's immediately deported. And of course, she cannot take her children with her. So she's sometimes separated more than 1 year, 2 years from her own kids. I think we can go to the next slide. And now Before Christina proceeds, just a little bit of information background on our data collection sample. So we are still in the process of interviewing people, but we have conducted numerous interviews with chief human resource officers, directors, consultants, policymakers from across a different range of organizations, leading companies, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, but also leading international organizations such as OECD, World Bank, UNDP, and so on. And we have also talked extensively with migration scholars from different range of disciplines, and some of the names you can see on this slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Ada. So what I'm going to do is share with you from our interviews thus far, 3 key risks that we've identified, as well as 3 key potential solutions to addressing these risks. So the first risk is that if we employ migrant workers, there may be insufficient support for those migrant workers. And connected to this issue is that there is a still rampant unethical movement of workers across borders. In fact, smuggling and trafficking are among the fastest growing transnational activities. It's a $30 billion a year industry, and that surpasses the EU or the US in terms of global humanitarian aid. And once they arrive, migrant and refugee workers are subject to all kinds of abuses. The New York Times documented that even here in the US, refugee children are often forced to work under horrible conditions under the guise of, quote unquote, repaying their sponsorships. And many large corporations are called out for abusing these child labor laws. So even here in the US, we need to develop some solutions to these issues. And one of those is, we've heard from the firms in our sample, creating specialist HR roles that specialize in refugee practices. They can help reduce the reliance on these third-party brokers or intermediaries. They can help to navigate the labyrinth of complex protocols and hiring rules. They can build awareness of country-specific shifts in hiring rules and create greater efficiencies in processing visas and work permits, which is often a barrier for many firms in employing refugees and migrants. Also important is the development of cross-sector partnerships that help to enforce the guidelines for ethical hiring and employment. One such cross-sector partnership is the World Employment Confederation. 49 different countries and many different recruiting companies are part of this confederation. Manpower, for example, Adecco Group. And what they're doing is ensuring ethical codes of conduct. So one of our interviewees from HP explains that by partnering with others in her industry, they were able to not only establish a code of conduct, but to make sure that it's enforced in their organization. So these codes of conduct ensure greater ethicality in the recruiting and hiring of refugees and migrants. Second key risk, what we refer to as super diversity. This is an unprecedented degree of heterogeneity among migrants in employed firms. For example, we are seeing an increase in the number of migrants from countries such as Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And in addition to that, we're seeing greater differentiation in skill levels and in the legal designation of these migrant workers. So diversity is as a result of race, ethnic culture, religions, skill level, gender, you name it, those sources of diversity are represented among these workforces. And many firms fail to integrate this diverse workforce, which results in feelings of exclusion and disrespect, and that threatens human dignity. So the solution here is ensuring inclusion and community. The most successful companies in our sample had HR professionals that were working really hard to dispel stereotypes and myths. Rather than viewing migrants and refugees as charity cases, they focused on their competencies and the valued skills that they bring to the workforce. They also worked hard to enhance a sense of community, making sure that migrants are fully embedded and engaged in the building of that community. A good example of this is at Chobani Yogurt. Hamdi Ulukaya, the CEO, has worked hard to employ refugees. They are a significant part of the workforce. And the refugees and the local employees work side by side, even in physical spaces that are needing to be refurbished. They collaborate together to create these spaces. And then this also helps to instill humanitarian motives as a very central part of their corporate strategy. We had the chairman of the board of directors of the Adecco Group explaining the value that migrants and refugees bring to the workplace, this increased diversity, if it is viewed as a competency rather than a problem, that's to the benefit of the entire organization. All right, so last risk. We're seeing an increase in what we refer to as global domestic migrants. Excuse me. These are employees who work from home using technology, but for firms in other nations rather than relocating. So when we have these flexible work arrangements, technology and digital connectivity become really, really critical because that varies to a great extent across the globe, as we know. And the other key challenge is maintaining human connectivity in addition to the digital connectivity. Working from home, many of us do this now regularly, and we know it increases the permeability of the work-life boundary. That can be very, very stressful, especially for women. And it can result in disaffection and alienation, which also threatens human dignity. So what is the solution to this new form of migration, if you will? Well, recognizing that, yes, it does save on relocation costs, and it also helps to prohibit the brain drain that we've heard about. But there really needs to be a focus on connecting and inspiring workers and developing meaningful work relationships. And this can be done through building of norms for meeting management and for using the technology to collaborate, recognizing that fatigue and burnout can occur, and helping to develop psychological resilience and coping strategies for the particular problems that those who are working remotely may find themselves subjected to. James Gray, the former knowledge manager at Alcoa, talked about the increases in remote work in his organization. And again, like the chairman of the Adecco Group, viewing this as an asset rather than a liability, that there is a greater access to knowledge all over the globe when in fact we collaborate in this way. So I will conclude there, and just by saying that applying these solutions, companies can retain migrant employees to create a distinct competitive advantage. Ada, would you like to add anything else before we conclude?
No, I think it's perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah. And I hope to see many probably at the conference next week.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there with us.